When I hear the words Paper Mario, the first thing that comes to mind is an elegant battle system. Intended for game beginners and amateur players, the first Paper Mario is a role-playing game that did away with big numbers and complicated character sheets. In their place, Paper Mario offered a battle system anchored by Mario's two oldest actions: jumping and hammering. The respective implications of these actions lent themselves well to a battle system in which enemy positions mattered greatly. From these two actions, enemies' positions and attributes, and three simple stats, the most elegant turn-based battle system I've ever seen was born. Nearly everything else in Paper Mario serves to subvert, bend, or expand these rules in some way. For example, the Spike Shield badge allows Mario to jump on sharp enemies, and the Hammer Throw badge vastly improves the hammer's reach. Together, these rules and modifiers manage to evoke Mario-style action in a role-playing game even better than its spiritual predecessor, Super Mario RPG. Again, it is, in a word, elegant. So of course, I found myself a little concerned upon seeing previews of the battle system for the latest Paper Mario game, the Origami King. Sliding ring puzzles? Board game panels? It could work, but I'm getting ahead of myself. What exactly is Paper Mario? Well, that's not as easy a question to answer as it used to be. The series has shifted in style, tone, and gameplay over time. Paper Mario includes traditionally inspired role-playing games with turn-based combat, a 2D action-adventure platformer game, and most recently, comedic adventure games with experimental combat systems. All of these games, however, invite players to enjoy Mario's world in whole new ways, through the use of charm, humor, and occasionally, even drama. Origami King upholds this tradition by offering the same invitation to players and making good on most of its promises, but some of its distinguishing design decisions make it rougher than its predecessors. The story begins with yet another ill-fated Mushroom Kingdom celebration, because it just can't catch a break. Mario and Luigi visit Toad Town for the annual Origami Festival, only to find the place barren. While investigating Peach's castle for answers, Mario finds the monarch looks a little different and is captured. Mario quickly escapes with the help of a benign origami being named Olivia and the emotional support of Bowser's face, but not before running afoul of Olivia's brother Olly, the Origami King. Harboring a deep disgust for flat paper beings, he vows to create a new Origami Kingdom and absconds with Peach's castle in a massive show of force. After recovering from their escape, Mario and Olivia resolve to destroy the streamers encircling the castle so they can regain entry, confront Olly, and stop the threat of his folded soldiers. Mario and Olivia's streamer chasing quest gives Origami King a heavy road trip vibe. Their journey from region to region falls into a comfortable pattern, alternating between seeking the help of ancient beings known as Velamentals and facing off against members of Olly's Legion of Stationary. Along the way, the duo visits locales both familiar and exotic, and meets a variety of colorful, though not necessarily memorable characters. Origami King's beautiful world rivals those of Nintendo's past stylized games. The focus on construction paper and cardboard textures has been with the series since 2012's Sticker Star, but this game manages to strike an incredible balance between the realism of these materials and the fantastical demands of its world. 2016's Color Splash leaned heavily on the former, resulting in the still impressive aesthetic of a diorama brought to life. By contrast, Origami King looks more like an organic paper reality, one in which the elements of its construction are more matter-of-fact than in your face. The interconnectedness and openness of its zones, as well as a steady frame rate, complement this further. As nice as these regions look, though, points of interest aren't distributed well. 2 of the game's 5 major regions contain vast expanses devoid of detail or structures, and novel locations such as the Ninja Theme Park are front-loaded. This is a shame, because while Origami King can deliver some gorgeous environments, the game is at its best when players get to mingle with characters. Much of that mingling will be with nameless and indistinct representatives of Mario's classic cast, such as the hundreds of toads in need of rescue across the land. That's fine though, because the writing is strong across the board, with plenty of dad jokes, witty observations, and even some poignant moments. Also, Mario and Olivia do team up with more substantial characters in each region. Strangely, I often found these companions' strength as characters to be inversely proportional to their gameplay utility, but they still provide Mario and Olivia with welcome company during their travels. Oh, and speaking of Olivia, she's without a doubt Nintendo's best guide character. Sure, she tends to over-explain things like the rest of them, but she possesses a blend of exuberance and naivety that melted my heart again and again. Watching her do things like space out in a spa or excitedly flop on a hotel bed is pure joy. She's just plain awesome. Also awesome is Origami King's soundtrack. I wasn't feeling the Red Streamer battle theme when Nintendo first revealed it, yet I immediately bopped to it the moment I heard it in-game. The music only gets better from there thanks to the game's broad instrumentation. For example, an accordion gently laughs as woodwinds and ivories tickle Picnic Road. Traditional Japanese string instruments and flutes lend authenticity to the House of Tricky Ninjas. Violins herald high adventure on the Great Sea. And then there's my favorite track, Snif City, which perfectly captures a hot hip town on a cold desert night. So far, everything sounds great, right? Origami King is a sumptuous but unevenly paced game with great writing and fun characters. Review over, time for pizza. Yeah, I'm still here. Let's talk about the combat. Okay, on a conceptual level, I get it. The game's about 2D paper beings versus 3D origami beings, so having a battle system that reflects the threat of this dimensional disparity makes sense. Also, expanding the grid for enemy placement creates more opportunities for enemy position to matter. A ring-shaped grid realizes both of these ideas. Unfortunately, the battle system's design creates constrictions. Each turn of regular combat in Origami King consists of 2 phases. In the first, players attempt to move enemies into lines or bunches of 4 by manipulating the ring grid with twists and slides, much like a Rubik's Cube. Successfully aligning all enemies at once rewards players with a damage bonus in the next phase. Players have limited time and limited moves to accomplish this, and thus, the first constriction presents itself. These limits keep the puzzles from becoming too complex, but they also constrain their evolution. Every basic encounter allows 1 to 3 moves per turn and usually includes 4, 8, or 12 enemies, and by the halfway point of the game, players have seen just about every style of permutation. By this, I mean that even though there are millions of possibilities for enemy layouts within these limitations, there are only so many distinct combinations of actions to require from players. Regardless of the precise enemy placement, a puzzle requiring, say, a slide then a spin is fundamentally no different from any other requiring a slide then a spin. In the second phase, players actually attack enemies by selecting actions. Here, the design strongly recalls Paper Mario's past, as jump and hammer attacks are effective against different arrangements of enemies. Each of these attacks, however, will always hit multiple enemies, and players always get enough actions each turn to potentially win the battle before they can fight back. On one hand, allowing this makes sense, given the large number of enemies in most encounters. On the other hand, it removes several opportunities for expanding Mario's skills throughout the game. After all, what else is there for Mario to do if he can already clear swarms of baddies by default? Items attempt to expand Mario's options in battle, but because he's already capable of doing so much, the utility they can offer is very niche. For example, fire flowers can exploit weaknesses and strike lines of foes from the side, but in most encounters, they're functionally just prettier jump attacks. Also, items are much worse investments than weapons, which incidentally offer even less utility. While weapons do eventually break in this game, a single pair of boots can squash dozens of enemies over its lifespan, compared to most items only defeating up to 4. The battle system also includes a few lifelines in case players still struggle in combat, but they create another issue. Besides items, weapons, and expensive accessories, players may spend their amassed fortunes on assistance during battle. They can buy extra time to solve puzzles and pay for direct help from the toads they've rescued. Depending on the size of the crowd and the amount spent, they can do as little as bop some enemies, or as much as top off Mario's hit points and solve part of the puzzle. These lifelines sound smart, but allowing players to make additional investments in every battle like this can set them up for disappointment. Allow me to explain. Imagine this line represents a neutral outcome for an encounter, like it's cleared but maybe it took a while or Mario took damage. More positive outcomes lie above the line, and more negative outcomes lie below. This yellow bar represents players' resource investment in a positive outcome. Resources can include out-of-game stuff like time and effort, and in-game stuff like items, weapon durability, and coins spent on assistance. The more resources a player invests, the more likely they are to achieve a positive outcome in battle. Got it so far? Now to add some reality to the model. This purple bar represents the range of negative outcomes a battle can have. This includes everything from a battle taking several turns to finish to total failure. This space from the top of the yellow bar to the bottom of the purple bar is what I call the expectation gap. The more players invest in a satisfying outcome, and the more potential that exists for negative outcomes, the greater the possible distance can become between players' expectations and the actual outcome. Though Origami King's battle system has some design issues, the potential for wide expectation gaps in its implementation is a much more serious problem. It's the difference between combat being boring and being frustrating. For example, take a resource as simple as weapon durability. Both weapons and enemies become progressively stronger throughout the game, but neither the attack power of weapons nor the hit points of enemies are ever revealed to players. This adds guesswork to selecting attacks that can result in making battles take longer. In such a case, a player receives a negative outcome despite making an investment towards a positive one. Even if the outcome would have been the same had the player made no additional investment, it wouldn't have stung as much because a negative outcome would have been more expected. The expectation gaps in standard battles may be annoying, but they're a drop in the bucket compared to the ones in boss battles. In boss battles, Mario is left outside the ring, while the big bad takes center stage. Several types of panels litter the arena, and players must arrange them in a fashion which creates a path for Mario to attack the boss. The challenge comes not just from getting Mario into the proper position, but getting him onto the right type of attack panel at the right time. Every boss fight has cycles and phases to thwart, and they all have very specific approaches for doing so. Hint envelopes explain to players what they need to do, but knowing what to do and knowing how to do it are two totally different things. Additionally, boss fights can be very lengthy affairs. Some panels require activation or release, which can disrupt attack timing. The bosses themselves also love to make a mess of things by either ruining panels or adding hazards to the board. Some will render the ring borderline unusable if they're not quickly brought to heal. And if all of this wasn't enough, some bosses can heal if not fought correctly. These extreme consequences for failure will compel players to lean on the game's assistance mechanisms even more. Toads can provide very useful previews of Mario's path, and they heal him much more efficiently than other methods. This help, however, can only carry players so far, as all it takes is forgetting or misunderstanding a single fight mechanic to send players back one or more turns. Thus, through encouraging ever more resource investment to avoid an ever deeper pool of consequences, the expectation gap widens, and more opportunities exist for players to become frustrated. Origami King's questionable design decisions also extend to how it messages itself to players. I've never met a game that wanted to be finished more than this one. Environmental puzzles will alter themselves to become easier after several failures. The prices of expensive accessories will drop over time. Healing is so easy and abundant that mushroom items are almost worthless. Weapons can be equipped during battle. There's even a free option later for extra puzzle guidance. Yet, despite all of these player-friendly inclusions, Origami King also chooses to include several instant game over scenarios. Some of these come from big set-piece moments, and others come from simply making incorrect narrative choices, much like in old adventure games. A few of these do come with warnings, but they're easy to disbelieve given the game's goofy tone. There's also a late-game boss who can instantly end Mario well into the fight. Many of these instant game overs rarely cost players much progress, but they're nonetheless completely at odds with how hard the game works to ensure players see it through to the end. Every Paper Mario game has flaws, whether in its story, its pacing, or its mechanics. The best Paper Mario games, however, have a sincere playfulness to them that's so welcoming that it smooths out their rough edges. Believe it or not, for all of its missteps in design and implementation, my desire to finish Origami King never wavered. I always looked forward to seeing the next gorgeous zone, hearing the next awesome track, solving the next pressing problem, and fighting the next incredibly silly piece of stationery. I became so smitten with this world that after beating it, I immediately headed back in to find collectibles, rescue toads, and simply enjoy the peace I'd brought to the land. Even though I think of an elegant battle system when I think of Paper Mario, much more than that draws me to the series. This truth rings clear in the Origami King, a game that, despite its fraught combat, I never wanted to leave.